Hi, I'm Professor Michael Siciliano, and this is week 4 of the Sociology of Work and Technology. We're going to be talking about technology and the body at work. So, for this lecture, you should be reading a chapter from Shoshana Zuboff's 1984 book, In the Age of the Smart Machine. This book was written primarily to discuss the role of computers and other information and communication technologies introduced in the 1970s and 1980s. To properly understand that time and what has come since, Zuboff argues we need to understand the historical development of work and technology. Understanding this requires discussion of the body at work. She begins this discussion by linking organizational hierarchies like the division of labor that we talked about in earlier weeks to an ongoing process of modernization, or the shift to modernity. In this process of modernization, she claims, society seeks to discipline, deny, and control what is considered humanity's more base, bodily, or animal qualities. So, work perceived to be more bodily or more associated with the physicality of the body tends to be less valued in terms of both remuneration, how much you're paid, and status, how you're looked upon by others. Why? Well, because Western societies tend to perceive the body as more animal-like and thus less valuable. Is this a problem? Yes, it contributes to the reproduction of inequality along lines of class, race, and gender. We saw this already when we read Cedric Robinson. He clearly illustrated how race and racism are crucial to the functioning of capitalism. Historically, new immigrant groups, even European immigrants, along with black and indigenous peoples and other people of color, were and often are described as animal-like or even bestial, in order to justify low wages, exclusion from the labor market, and, in certain extreme cases, enslavement. This also occurs along lines of gender. For example, women are often considered, in the context of capitalist economies, as nothing more than bodies. People who are, bodies who are expected to give birth to the next generation, and nothing more. Only through struggles for civil rights and women's rights has this changed over the past 50, 60, 70 years. And even then, this hierarchy still exists between work that requires physical toil, that is dangerous to the body, that requires sweat, the use of hands, and the mental or cognitive labor performed by white-collar workers or managers. In terms of class, blue-collar workers are often perceived as less intelligent, less capable when compared to white-collar workers. This is also because they have to work with their hands to perform dangerous, often dirty work. If you want to ground this in your own experience, you might ask yourself, how often have you, your friends, or your parents made fun of someone for having a blue-collar job or lacking in education? Be honest with yourself. You probably do it more often than you'd care to admit. Conversely, perhaps you've been on the receiving end of such criticism, in which case you know all too well the reality of these persistent divides. Now, according to Zuboff, technology at work represents attempts to grapple with the body's role in production as both source of effort and skill. It does so by reducing the amount of effort and the amount of skill needed to perform any particular work task. This is especially true of industrial, often blue-collar work. So, technology aims to conserve the labor power put forth by workers. As she says, technology aims at solving the limitations of the human body in order to improve production or some other value-producing activities. Now, what are these limitations, you might ask? Well, for one, we get tired. Our bodies falter under extreme conditions, resilient as we may be. This places limits on the length of the working day, and thus our productivity. Technology also aims to reduce skills and reduce workers' ability to gain skills. This should sound a bit like Taylorism, and Zuboff makes that connection quite clear when she discusses automation. Automation is both a means of conserving bodily effort while also diminishing the amount of skills that people have, de-skilling and thus devaluing labor. If a machine can do a task, then the person who formerly performed that task is no longer valuable to an employer, and so does not need to be paid or hired, at least from the employer's point of view. Now, I think this warrants some discussion of skill. According to Zuboff, to be skilled is to have a body capable of doing things, of developing intuitive, perhaps even nonverbal ways of knowing. Now, for Zuboff, the body is a knowing body, a feeling body, a sensual body. As workers know things, even if they're performing what business owners might mistakenly call unskilled work, they're still knowledgeable. This may not be intellectual knowledge, like what we learn in a university, but it is, as Zuboff says, quote, knowledge that accrues in hands, fingertips and wrists, feet, nose, eyes, ears, skin, muscles, shoulders, arms, and legs, as surely as it was inscribed in the brain. It was knowledge filled with intimate detail, materials and ambiance, the color and consistency of metal as it was thrust into a blazing fire, the smooth finish of the clay as it gave up its moisture, the supple feel of the leather as it was beaten and stretched, the strength and delicacy of glass as it was filled with human breath. She's talking here of craft production, but also metalworking, things that would happen in industrial forms of production. The knowledge here is practical, embodied. Skill as it develops from experimentation, from the lived experience of work. Their knowledge is sensual, based on how a work process or a tool feels, smells, looks, sounds, or the unique rhythms of a task. So I wonder, can you think of examples of skills you've developed that might be based on embodied sense rather than intellectual knowledge, a certain feel for whatever it is that you're doing rather than something that you've been instructed verbally on how to do? Those skills are difficult to teach, but they're often crucial to all sorts of tasks. If those skills are difficult to teach, then whoever possesses those skills is highly valuable and thus has some degree of power over their job. They can't easily be eliminated. Now, according to Zuboff, technology aims to deal with the problem of the body, and part of that problem, from the perspective of capitalists, is this embodied skill, because those skills give workers a fair amount of power. So technological automation in the service of capitalism often aims at reducing or eliminating the need for workers' embodied skill. As Zuboff says on page 56, production depended on what the body could accomplish with strength and skill. Techniques that improve output have been driven by a general desire to decrease the pain of labor, as well as by employers' intentions to escape dependency upon that knowledge which only the sentient, laboring body could provide. Skilled workers historically have been ambivalent toward automation, knowing that the bodies it would augment or replace were the occasion for both their pain and their power. Zuboff's view of technology is much more complicated than that put forth in the normative claims made by Smith and Taylor, and also more complicated than the more critical arguments advanced by Marx and Braverman. Technology is neither uniformly positive nor simply just a tool for capitalist domination. It's both positive, alleviating danger and strain, but also contributing to workers' economic struggles. Now, Zuboff's analysis of the body in this chapter strictly focuses on blue-collar work. But what about pink-collar work? What about white-collar work? What about typing? What about information technologies like computers or smartphones? How do those affect the body? How do we relate to them as laboring bodies? These technologies and the work they're used for seem to require less of our physicality. They're less dangerous. Think about it. Most white collar work in professions like law or work in finance or even creative jobs, such as the social media work you've all mentioned in your posts, those primarily require workers to process and interpret information. To perform, sure, on screen, much like I'm doing right now, but these are not particularly physically demanding jobs. They're also not particularly dangerous jobs. How do these forms of work relate to the body? Might there be uniquely sensual knowledge of computers or phones? This is what we'll think about next time when we talk about pink collar workers in the offices of the mid 20th century and social media content producers. See you then.